Hello, folks. How you doing? Welcome to day 2 of the Bring Your Own Bold Virtual Summit, brought to you by us here at the independent creative agency Shaped By. My name is Dave Corlett. I'm the business director here at the agency. And if you joined us for any or even all of yesterday's sessions, I really do hope you enjoyed tuning in. It certainly sounds like you did. We've had lots of great feedback already, which is so awesome to hear. I mean, there was so much to be inspired by throughout the day. If you didn't tune in to some of the sessions, don't worry, you'll get access to all of the recordings after we wrap up the event. And if you're just joining us for the first time, welcome to BYOB. Okay, if you thought yesterday was good, just wait and see what we've got in store for you today. We've got 5 enticing, thought-provoking sessions packed with insights and inspiration to help you guys go forth and build bolder brands. And I really couldn't be more delighted to kick the day off with 3 wonderful guests here with me today, discussing a topic that really gets right to the nub of how B2B businesses set themselves apart through creativity. To do that, you need in-house creative teams that are really allowed to flourish, to do what they do best, to solve problems, to think differently, and to add a dash of creative magic to your brand and your business. And that mindset, that freedom, ultimately comes from great leadership. So what does it take to be a truly effective in-house creative leader? And do you even need to be in a leadership position to be one? Before we dive into all of that, I'm just going to do some quick intros to our panel here. I'm going to start with Rachel. Rachel Gogel is a Parisian creative director, graphic designer, educator, and speaker based in San Francisco. She runs her own consultancy where her approach is informed by experiences both in-house and agency side. And as a fractional design executive and queer leader, Rachel believes in fostering inclusive spaces that unlock human potential. Over the last 15 years, she's led major initiatives at GQ, the New York Times, Meta, Godfrey Dadich, Departures, Airbnb, and Dropbox. And currently, you can find her shaping employee experiences, coaching design leaders, and building TV show pitch decks for public figures, media executives, and also developing brand identity systems for academic institutions and startups. So that's Rachel. We've got Jessica Rosenberg here with us as well. Jessica's got over 17 years of experience helping brands tell their stories in differentiated and breakthrough ways. Her skills as a designer, creative, and leader have been shaped by working across companies in advertising and tech like Crispin, Porter, and Bogaski, Twitter, Cloudflare, Mural, and Webflow. And she's just as passionate about coming up with a big idea as she is executing it. And more recently, Jess has joined the design org at One Finance, leading the brand design function. And lastly, we've got Matt Price over here from the UK. Matt's a creative leader with a career that's traversed award-winning agencies, high-performance brands, and innovative startups. Fueled by a deep passion for cultivating dynamic creative teams and crafting distinctive brand experiences, Matt's earned a reputation for shaping and evolving brands across diverse industries. He currently leads creativity at TravelPerk, the all-in-one corporate travel platform. So welcome to our panel. Before we dive into the specifics of creative leadership, I think it's really important to start by framing the conversation with some wider context on leadership as a whole. I'd really like to know, and I'll start with you, Rachel, if that's okay. Just a really simple question. What does leadership mean to you?
I love that you framed it as a simple one, because actually to me it's quite layered. For those of you, kind of on the call, as you may know from experience, I feel like for me, it's important to actually start off understanding the differences between management and leadership, because they tend to be used interchangeably. And there's definitely a lot of overlap between the two in terms of what, the work that managers and leaders do, but there's also a lot of differences. I'm obviously not here to go deep, and we're about to have a great conversation. I'm excited to hear what Matt and Jessica think. But the key takeaway for me is that management is a role, as in, being called a manager is like being called a school teacher or a heart surgeon or a librarian. But leadership, on the other hand, is how you choose to show up. So leadership really, to me, it's a skill, of being able to guide and influence other people. It's really multidimensional. It's a creative practice. And leadership skills can really be developed at any stage of your career. So something to remember is, regardless of your title or level, experience or degree, we are all leaders. Everyone on this call is a leader. And, just it really is a quality rather than a job. And it really is something that has to be bestowed. It must be earned, and people must really want to follow you. So there's so much related to being an effective leader. I know we'll talk a lot about that today, but a huge part of this journey for me has been just about becoming more self-aware, identifying my strengths and weaknesses, communicating them to others, and really trusting myself, because I feel like that allows others to trust you more, and just being very communicative. And there's so many soft skills that I'm sure we'll get into. But I feel like I would love to hear what others think, but really just kind of understanding those differences and thinking about all of the things that you kind of need in order to really have influence and build trust with other people, build relationships. That those are the things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you're right. We'll definitely get onto that whole topic of being a leader without being a leader, little L, without being a leader, big L, I suppose, in terms of kind of title and position and whatnot. But yeah, absolutely. Jess, is that something that you can go with as well?
Yeah. And I love, Rachel, that you kicked it off by saying it's not simple at all. And it's so hard to answer succinctly. But I would say, just to add on to what Rachel kicked us off with, it's leadership, to put it simply, again, even though it's not, is to helping make your company successful and helping to make others successful. And I think the word helping is important here, because I don't think it's a job one can do alone. I think it's something that's highly collaborative. It's working, across the company with your peers. It's working with your boss and making them successful. It's leading a team and helping make them successful in their craft, their career, their own personal goals, and all of that mixed together, along with vision, influence, and relationship building, hopefully makes a strong and successful leader.
Yeah, definitely. And coming to you, Matt, you've worked at such a range of businesses, from startups to huge multinational companies to where you are now at TravelPerk. Your perspective on leadership, has that been shaped by those different environments that you've worked in?
Yeah, 100%. Firstly, I mean, what I can add to that Rachel and Jess haven't already covered, because it's fantastic answers. But I think they hit the nail on the head around the kind of, and you mentioned the little L, Dave. And there's a quote that I've held with me for a few years now around managers make themselves look good, whereas leaders make others look good, right? And that's kind of what our role is. Our role is to support, inspire, and make sure that essentially egos are taken out of the equations at times, right? And that in a lot of B2B brands, there's a lot of egos. In a lot of high pressure brands, there's a lot of egos. And I think it's our role to enable others to basically look good. And especially as a creative leader, that comes through your inspiration, that comes through your, challenging them in a way that isn't necessarily forcing them to do something, that they don't want to. And my journey through agency to now in-house, I've seen many different leaders. I've learned a lot from things that I know I don't want to be and things that I do want to be. I do believe leading by example, in the sense of don't do something that you wouldn't actually do. And I think that's important in creativity, right? Dare I say, getting involved in the trenches, getting your hands dirty, whether that be creating something or whether that actually be, the difficult conversations or understanding feedback. So like I said, it's very much about leading kind of at the forefront, but making sure it's not just all about you. It's about everyone that's within you and surrounded by you.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that point, Matt, just as you mentioned it, just something that sprung to mind. Is that something that can be learned, or does it kind of always have to have been inherent in you, do you think?
I actually think you can learn it. I think it's about putting yourself out of your comfort zone, right? Or putting yourself an opportunity to lead. I think, Rachel, you mentioned about job titles, etc. For me, leadership is shown across every single level, irrelevant of if you're a junior, if you're a creative director, if you're an executive creative director, however you want to put that. I think leadership is a quality that anyone can show, and anyone can show it at any time. There's no tick box, if you will. And I think with a lot of these, especially when you're in a B2B, maybe brand environment, we can look at performance reviews as leadership as this thing you have to naturally tick off. Whereas actually just demonstrating that in a more, I think, natural, cohesive kind of way is better than trying to force it. So for me, I've kind of learned it as I go. I'm naturally a very introverted person, and I'm very surprised to be here talking about creative leadership. And it took me a while to get to this kind of point, but it's a skill that I've always just taken on and just kind of, I think you just learn through exposure, right? Like you do with a lot of these skills. Like I said, it's not a tick. I've done leadership. I am far from the finished article. I'm fully aware from that. And I think I continue to learn and push myself on that. And that's what everyone should do.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of kind of that side of things, particularly coming into different environments, I kind of wanted to get a bit more specific with moving on to the next point, which is, I suppose, let's set the scene a little bit. So, maybe you're an in-house creative who's joined from the agency world. You're moving up the chain, kind of gaining a bit more leadership responsibility. And, I haven't experienced this firsthand, but I've certainly heard anecdotally that one of the biggest challenges on that journey is plugging into kind of, I suppose, what lies beyond your function in the creative function, really, because you really need to kind of tune into, the wider business objectives, metrics, terminology, etc. Jess, I'll come to you first on this one. When you first stepped into in-house land, I suppose, from the agency side, how quickly did you find that you had to get a grasp of that kind of deeper business, I suppose, language, lexicon, understanding, whatever you want to call it?
Oh yeah, I mean, immediately. I think the first in-house land role that I had was at a very small startup. I was the only designer / creative person there. And I immediately needed to know where to focus. And that led to me needing to understand, I was on a marketing team, so I needed to understand what the marketing team's goals were. And part of my role and objective was helping the team to meet those goals with creative ideas, strategies, designs. And so the more folks can learn what their overall org or team's goals are as they ladder up to the company and business goals, I think the more successful they'll be. And I encourage you to try and do that as soon as humanly possible. Talk to as many people across the company as you can, learn about what they do, what's important to them, what their objectives are, learn about the company's goals overall, the immediate ones, the ones they have in the next 6 months, where they aspire to be in the next few years. And I think knowing all of those things will really set you and your team up, your creative team up for success in the short and long term.
Is that easy to do though with the day job, I suppose, or getting to grips with the day job as well?
Yeah, I mean, I consider it to be part of the day job, and relationship building is such a core component of that. And I think as you're building those relationships cross-functionally, you can seek to understand what the team and business's goals are. And so it's crucial that folks really build in time to build those relationships with, people across the company, your peers, execs, individual contributors, whoever it may be. Get to know as many people outside of your team and what they care about. That way you can be strong partners to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming to you, Matt, do you have any tips? I know you've been on a similar journey, I suppose, to Jess in a way. Do you have any tips for folks that kind of are maybe feeling that, they want to go deeper, they want to kind of get more of a sense? Because I suppose when you're at an agency, and I'm using one kind of particular career path here, which might not, it's certainly not the only one, but just as an example, like, when you're at an agency, and I can speak from experience here, you get a glimpse into a client's world, you get a glimpse into a business mindset, I suppose. But then when you go in-house, you're in there, everything is your world, I suppose. Do you have any tips for people that are either struggling or really want to kind of go deeper into that side of things, on creative teams?
Oh, wow, yeah, there's so many tips, I'm sure, and I'll probably not remember half of them, but I do think we can forget sometimes to just ask stupid questions that we think are stupid, right? And sometimes that gets us to these places of understanding not only other teams' goals, it understands the terminology within businesses, it understands where you can go as an individual. And asking those questions, I think, if you're in the right environment, of course, which I'm not suggesting that every single brand has that environment, but people shouldn't be there to make you fail. They should be there to support you and to help you succeed. And I know I've asked stupid questions at Travel Perk. I continue to ask stupid questions. And yeah, people have to respond to them. And I think that's great because it helps me learn. It helps my team learn. You know, our role is to understand everything that we do as creatives, right? So we can sell a better story or a better experience to our audiences. If we don't ask questions, then we're making assumptions. Assumptions are dangerous because we then take ourselves on this kind of creative journey and we create something that isn't connected, right, to what we want to do. I remember my first full jump into the head of creative at Gusto, and I had no idea what I was doing at all. And I said this to my team yesterday. I was like, look, I took this jump and it was the biggest probably jump of my career to go into a tech unicorn, right? From being in-house at various places, but not to the level of taking my own team and building it. And there were terminology that I had zero idea what to do. And I would just reach out to those people and be like, can you explain what that abbreviation is? Because it sounds like something I should not, you know, ingest, but actually turned out it was fine. So I think just asking questions and not being fearful of those questions. The likelihood is if you're asking them, someone else has them, or there is a knowledge base somewhere that people can point you towards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think ask stupid questions is just a great mantra for kind of any walk of life, really. Coming to you, Rachel, was there a point in your career where you kind of maybe went from I am a creative to I'm a creative, you know, an in-house creative that understands, you know, my wider role within the business and understands the business as a whole?
Yeah, I was actually reflecting a lot with this question just because I actually kind of fell into a people management role or a higher leadership role at a very young age in my early 20s, and was faced with kind of navigating, trying to understand the business and, you know, how to support my team. My entire team was, you know, people who were older than me, more experienced than me on paper. And I, at that point in time, really was more focused on craft or execution and had to basically become more adaptable instead of being heads down, really look up, look sideways, kind of observe and learn and ask a lot of questions. I think I'll add on to Matt and Jess's responses here, which is, it's yes, it's asking questions, but it's also asking for help and acknowledging when you don't know the answer, and leaning on others, leaning on your team, and actively listening and observing. If you're new in a space and there's a lot going on, it's okay, even if you're in a bigger role, to kind of sit still and really lean on others who have maybe been at the company longer and then absorb as much information as possible. I think there's just been a huge, if you're able to understand the kind of unlock when it comes to, you know, solving problems, leaning on others, how, you know, key collaboration is, being able to connect the dots between the needs creatively and the kind of business impact is huge. So I did want to maybe wrap up this particular question by saying, don't be afraid when we talk about business acumen. That doesn't mean that you have to go off and get your MBA. If you haven't, gone through that, that's fine. What we're really talking about is just really understanding how your work and the craft and the execution and the creative, how it impacts, or relates to whatever is going on the business side, and being able to speak that language and kind of learn how to navigate those types of conversations. I think that just anecdotally, that was one of the biggest learning curves when I worked in-house at Meta, which was, I joined from having had a huge career in publishing and was dropped into the middle of tech. And I was very surprised that the biggest learning curve was figuring out how to kind of pitch creative ideas to a team of product leaders and engineers and other people and get support, asking for resources, asking for budget. Really, one of the biggest things I learned was that mood boards were not effective in those types of meetings. So, things like that. But there's so much in just embracing discomfort and asking for help and really just listening and really just trying your best.
Yeah, and is there also an appreciation of the fact that it takes time? You're not going to learn all this overnight. it's a time-consuming process, and accepting that means that you could probably be at peace with, that steady pace of learning. I know there's some things you need to get to grips with fairly quickly.
Yes, I know this gets said a lot, but the "fake it till you make it" expression is true. I mean, I think there's a lot of smart people, smart people that you work with, people that you can lean on, but you may be faced with a role or a scope of work that feels uncomfortable to you and may take time. But stay patient, build resilience, and as long as you kind of believe in yourself and you have a confidence in the way that you kind of position yourself, or so much comes through in body language and in tone of voice and kind of how you ask questions. You can really navigate most situations if you kind of lean into your gut and just try your best, as I said before.
Yeah, absolutely. I honestly, I'm loving the insights today. Ask stupid questions and fake it till you make it. I mean, it's great. They're great lessons in life generally, and they work. They really do work. I just wanted to move on. So, let's kind of set another scene, I suppose. That individual that we spoke about in the last question has maybe moved up to a creative director role, an executive creative director role, maybe. When you get to that stage, how do you, and we've kind of touched on this already, but it's kind of expanding on that point, I suppose. How do you as a creative leader kind of go about, and I apologize if this sounds a bit crass, but how do you kind of prevent your team being seen across a B2B business or a business in general as the colouring in department, I suppose, and really kind of going deep into communicating your value, the value of creativity, but your value as well, your team's value to your peers right across the organization. Jess, I'll come to you first on that one, by the way, just put you on the spot.
Oh yeah, that's fine. I think a lot of it does go back to what we've been discussing already around the business objectives. And if you can align there first and fully understand what the team and company's goals are, you can have more informed and strategic conversations with folks across the business. I've been asked this a lot throughout just like my entire career, like how do you become strategic partners versus just a production department? And it's really hard because both realities exist typically. Like a creative team needs to execute on the work. There is a lot of production work that's involved, but there is a lot of opportunity to be a strategic partner as well. And I found that specific focus area takes a lot of proactivity from leaders and the teams. And it's not something that will ever be asked for by other departments. And so I've found in my experience, it's something you have to work really hard for, and showing the value of your team. We are creative thinkers. We want to partner with you to come up with these ideas to achieve the goals. And so a lot of it is really just like a lot of sharing of work ideas across, the marketing team, the company, being in meetings where the team can pitch concepts that align with the goals. And then also bringing people along for the ride. So like if we have a brainstorming session, involve people from across the company. I think that the best ideas can come from literally anywhere, and bringing people in early on those processes not only helps to prove that we're strategic partners, but it's also really fun. And you get to see the creativity come out in other people across teams. So a few different ways to do it. Those are a few that I've dabbled with in the past, but I'm curious to hear what Matt and Rachel have to say.
Yeah, me too. I'll come to you, Matt, next on that one.
Yeah, what to add again? I think where I've had success, and this isn't anything that I know can replicate because it depends. I've actually I've kind of disregarded business goals and gone, what other opportunities as a creative team can we do that demonstrate some value across business? And whether that be related to a business goal, obviously that's fantastic because then you're doing your job as a manager or as a leader. But for example, looking for those, a lot of especially B2B brands, B2B in-house teams that suffer with this coloring in or like the production house methodology. It's about breaking that methodology, right? It's about breaking that process that happens, that this comes in, I make it look good, instead of saying, like I said this to my team yesterday, good design, anyone can do that, like make something look and sound nice. But when you go for great design, which is about connection and experience, you have to demonstrate that by doing something very differently. So, for example, where I see opportunities in a lot of in-house roles is about taking the visual identity and the verbal identity and the experience itself and taking that for a walk to demonstrate how you could do differently. There's a reason why at both Travel, Perk, and at checkout.com, I have retrospectively built brand new visual identities and then rebranded them. It's because I have demonstrated that value in not only looking better, but sounding and experiencing better. So that's where I look to find these kind of opportunities that shift us from, sometimes you have to take that leap from, yeah, we can collaborate, but what happens if we suddenly flip that on the head and actually we take the lead on something and we drive it, right? We drive this crazy bus of this brand as opposed to you guys. Because if we wait for you guys, the collaboration might kind of not click, or the squads aren't quite set up correctly. So sometimes we have to do that. So I look for those kind of opportunities, as well as seeing how you can establish like what I call self-serve, which I'm sure is what a lot of leaders want to establish, which is how can we jettison off some of this work that is called the coloring in into a way that allows other people to become designers that fits within our creative remit, right? Like as in, we've created a Canva system or a Figma self-serve system or a AI generated X, Y, and Z. That allows you to step away and take your time to look at, well, what are the big projects that we want to work on whilst all this other work is going away nicely? You know, we're still in charge of it. We're still the brand police. We're making sure it still looks great, but we don't have to worry about it because it's stuff that sucks our time away. So I look for those kind of opportunities. Of course, if I can package it up into some form of goal, which is my role, right? As in, if I build this, we can spend more time doing the big shifting needle projects for the business. That's how it's my kind of position to do that. I would say that that cultural shift isn't just for your marketing colleagues or anyone you work with across business. It's actually a big shift for your team as well, to understand that it's okay to take a pause. And I think Jess mentioned pitching and storytelling. I think that is key to really flipping yourselves on that strategical journey, right? Which is what the strategy is about. It's like who, what, where, why. And that storytelling and that pitching and that going in with confidence and saying, look, yeah, we could have done what you asked, but here it is looking completely different. That surprises people as long as they're on the journey, as long as it's not a sent on Slack, like I've just done this for you, because that puts the barriers up. Taking people on that emotional journey, I think that's where having that agency experience sometimes is hugely beneficial, because our role is to basically take a client through many workshops, through many post-it note sessions, through many presentations on this journey of how great they can be, and then deliver brand guidelines at the end, right? And that's our role. And I think that's what we sometimes as creative leaders can forget to flip into doing in-house. And also we need to educate our team on doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to mention, actually, I think you've definitely taken some of that agency mindset into the whole, pitching and storytelling side of things. And it's really interesting to hear how that works, you know, inside a large organization like yours. I think also really, really good point about proactivity as well. And I think that obviously comes, I suppose, with a bit more confidence within those kind of roles. But ultimately, you know, and you guys have all mentioned it in some way, shape or form, you know, that proactiveness to get out there and speak to people, communicate with people, meet people, have conversations is definitely massively beneficial. Rachel, I'm just interested in your perspective on this one, because, you know, you've been at organizations, large, small, and everything in between. Is it harder to kind of communicate the value of what you do as a creative leader and a creative team in a bigger organization, or not so much?
Actually, a lot of the things that Matt and Jessica spoke to, really, they're transferable skills, no matter the size and maturity of a company. I feel like you may still be faced with those types of conversations in a startup environment, or a nonprofit environment, just as much as these larger organizations, again, depending on what leadership looks like. Now, if you have an executive leader who understands design, who understands the value of creative, you may be faced with different types of conversations, but that is not always the case. So really, I'll add to what Matt and Jess mentioned, because I think sometimes creatives can easily forget that, you know, you kind of assume that everyone understands your value and that they should understand, you know, whatever it is that you're delivering is only adding to the product or the brand or whatever it may be. But we make a lot of assumptions. I think one of the biggest skills or things to consider is, how do you explain or bring someone on the journey, like a non-creative or non-designer, and get them to feel invested in the brand, or, that they should feel equally, part of the brand building process as the creative team is. So really thinking about everyone as a brand ambassador, which means maybe you're investing more time in helping others get onboarded to the brand, getting them more familiar. It may feel like you're kind of dumbing down certain aspects of the brand in order to bring someone in, but making the time to do that actually has really long-term impact. And then it clicks. Usually what you realize pretty soon is, oh, they didn't really understand the meaning of that part of the system, or, they thought that design was just decoration. And it all comes from an innocent place, that's not an ill-willed endeavor. It's just maybe they didn't have that training, or maybe that's just not something that they were wired to think about. And so really spending the time understanding where they're coming from and actually investing in, getting them to, be invested in the brand, and being patient, and inviting them to critiques, like as Jessica was mentioning, or there's so many different ways to bring people on a journey, even as Matt mentioned. But again, I would remind people not to assume that everyone should automatically get it.
Yeah. And I don't want to bring the tone of the conversation down too much to a negative point, but have you ever been in an environment where, and again, it's probably not from ill will necessarily, but you've been up against somebody that is quite fiercely against, kind of, I suppose, doesn't have that creative mindset and is determined to stick to that viewpoint? You've not really you've struggled to kind of change their mindset?
All the time. It happens. It's very natural. I think I'd like to say that, it always works out, but that would be, lying. I mean, there's some instances where you really try hard, and again, it really takes a lot of work and other people kind of involved too. It really can take a village, and your whole team can be involved, not just leadership, but everyone. And there's instances where it's not a priority, or they want to focus on something else, and really all they need is production. So just go over here and produce. So there are instances where maybe they're not ready as a company, or maybe it's just not the right time. And you have to ask yourself if you want to stay in that type of an environment, or if you want to find another place where maybe they value, what you bring to the table. So it really is a choice, and there's different types of companies at different stages, and you just trust your gut on that one.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I want to move on a little bit and take our kind of fictional, budding creative leader that became a creative leader, as it were, and now they're building an in-house team. So I think this is going to be a really important topic for a lot of our audience out there, especially the ones that are focused on building and leading an in-house creative team. I'm sure there's a lot of you there. So I suppose the question is the first question is really, how do you know which hires to make and when? And then there's a part two to this question, I suppose, which is what do you look for in those candidates, really? And yeah, Matt, I'd love to get your perspective on this one.
Yeah, and I mean, hiring and identifying your opportunities as a team comes not only with experience, right? As in, I'm sure we can all walk into a creative team and probably go, that lacks a little bit, but their hunch is based on probably what an experience, as opposed to maybe evaluating the situation in a way that warrants I think a slightly better educated approach to a hiring system. I think for me, what I look at is doing skills mapping with my team. So asking them ultimately, where do they think things aren't particularly set out in that team? And that forms a really interesting conversation, not only for their personal development, but for you as a leader to go, cool, that's exactly where I thought we were lacking. So now I can start to build in that, and it will slot nicely into this team. I do think as well, as a creative leader, sometimes spending the time to do an audit that isn't just like visual and verbal, it's actually an audit of processes, it's audits of the ways you work with others, because it not only identifies potentially work that needs improving, which may need a design skill set, but also like an operational side that maybe was lacking, or a new process you need to do. So for me, it's about taking that time to implement like change and being sensible about your hires, and make sure it's a team that, you know, isn't for where you are now, which is often a lot of B2B kind of brands can be like, we just need to fix this straight away. It's kind of taking a little bit of an idea and going, well, what happens if I zoom out of this and go, right, in 6 months, I want the team to have achieved this. In 12 months, this. In 2 years, this. Because that allows you to build a bit of a stronger roadmap on hiring. I've made mistakes in both ways of being like, I immediately need this because I need to elevate the creativity. So therefore, that mistake has turned into contractors, right? Freelancers. Great to fill that kind of void, to enhance that. But then you've got to balance in, well, that's not a very sustainable model. It's very expensive. So how do I then build in and nurture the right team in-house that get that connective tissue with the brand itself? So that enables that slight kind of like, if you will, immediate pressures that can come with B2B roles, where, you know, there's goals to hit, as Jess mentioned earlier, there's business goals come in and you're like, oh God, I need to achieve them. So you have to plug those gaps and then plan for the future. I think it all comes down to, and consistently, like that planning, prioritization, right? As in, and that goes for work as well, especially when you're working in large organizations. It's understanding that what is happening in the future, as long as you can, and prioritizing that allows you to prioritize the team. We can often be, I think, slightly egotistical as creative leaders, where we think, do you know what, I'd really like an animation motion or 3D whiz or something like that on my team. So you might invest in that. And that might not be necessary for the business at that stage. Yeah, it creates cut through, but is it a sustainable approach to hiring? I think we need to put our egos on the back burner and think in the business sense, but also what we have in front of us. Are there anyone you can nurture and develop before you start to hire, right? And then going from that. So that my approach be very much around the planning and prioritization approach.
Absolutely, yeah. And Rachel, is that an approach you take as well?
Definitely. And I'll add on to Matt's contribution here, and to suggest that I think it's important people realize too what's happening behind the scenes, even to get headcount, or to write a job description. That takes time, that takes negotiation. It takes building a relationship with the human resources department. And in terms of just identifying the need, which kind of Matt was speaking to, back to the audit idea, which is great. There's the, we talked earlier about building relationships across the organization. In this case, you want to be investing in building relationships with the recruiter, the sourcer, the hiring manager, the main lead, kind of helping you source whatever candidate or talent. And very often in some companies, HR departments may not be poised to source creative talent, or they may be, they may need a helping hand in really understanding what you're looking for, so that it really feels like a team effort in terms of finding the right people for the right job, whether that's contract, freelance, full-time, etc. So I think it's important to remember what's happening behind the scenes, and the amount of work it takes to even get a role identified and put out there. As someone who is full-time freelancing now, I'm kind of on the flip side of this conversation, because if anything, I'm trying to, I have to constantly keep my digital Rolodex updated in case there was ever a job that comes my way where I would feel the need to outsource it and get additional help. And, I'm still new and kind of building my own little consultancy, but I think, if I was still in-house, I would still be thinking of, who can I ask to, who asks for referrals. Referrals help a lot when building teams, and kind of investing in those relationships. I know we didn't get to your second part of the question around what to look for in a candidate. I can hold on that until Jess responds, to the first part of the question, whatever is best, Dave.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Yeah, I do want to come on to that actually. But so Jess, I know that you've got a defined point of view on this one, because I know you've done webinars and sessions in the past on org design. So I'd love to hear that.
Love org design. And also, just to quickly touch on the digital Rolodex, like I've built and scaled quite a few creative teams throughout my career. I've had the great privilege to do so, and it's one of my favorite things. And I would say, not to over tout the importance of networking or like relationship building outside of your job, but it is such a strong, quality to have as a creative person, is meeting other creatives reaching out, asking for introductions. I get tons of messages on LinkedIn constantly, like asking to chat. And over time, I've built up this network of just like so many talented and kind and humble and incredible people that, whenever it comes to time to build a team again, I'm like, oh, let me look into my little Rolodex of incredible talent and who I've connected with over the years. So there's so much value in that. On org design, that was your question. My thoughts on org design. Org design on creative teams can be achieved in many different ways. I think a lot of it depends on the type of company you're at, the overall org the team is embedded in. Sometimes a creative team can be part of a centralized design org where they exist with product design and ops. In my personal experience, I've mostly been on creative teams that have been part of wider marketing orgs. And the way that I've typically structured those teams in the past have mapped to either specialty or specific functions on marketing. So what I mean by specialty is, let's say you have a brand design pod, a campaigns pod, a content pod, and a sign like retail pod, for example. Alternatively, if you're on a marketing team, this is what I've most often done, is you have a product marketing function, creative function, a campaigns function, brand function, and then some functions like web and video that are underlying that support all of it. So it really depends on how you're structured overall, what the priorities of your team are, and what type of specialists you have on the team. But it can be sliced and diced in so many different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I know there was a second part to that question about what to look for in a candidate, but I'm a little bit conscious of time. There's a final question that I really, really want to get all of your input on, because I think it's super important. And I want to leave some time for a couple of questions from the audience as well. We've had a few come in. So that question really is about, so we spoke at the start, I kind of mentioned, this point that we've touched on in our discussions before this session about, leadership with a big L. So, you are the leader, so to speak, or you're one of the leaders, and leadership with a little L, which really is leadership that anybody can display, qualities that anybody can display, confidence that anybody can display. So what I really want to ask, and Rachel, I'll come to you first on this one, because we've had a lot of conversations about this. In what ways can junior, I suppose, mid-level, or we've spoken before about a term that I hadn't actually come across, individual contributors, IC, people who know they don't want to be managers, but they have leadership qualities to contribute. What can those team members do, or in what ways can they contribute leadership qualities to their teams and organizations without necessarily being a big L leader?
I love this question. So first off, if you're new to this term IC, I feel like it was coined by tech companies, but more and more I've noticed, and when I was working in agency world for a little bit before going out on my own, I brought that concept to the agency context, just because I feel like most companies, and maybe it's still true, assume that once you've reached a certain level as an IC, you will, of course, want to move up the ladder by managing people and then teams and then entire organizations. But, for some of us, maybe that career path makes complete sense for those, who are interested in people management. But for others, the next step really isn't quite so clear. So really what it means is that someone is not on a management track within an organization, but instead really manages their own projects and tasks. So what's wonderful about this concept and why I love it and try and bring it everywhere I go is because really you can be an IC for your entire career, never once taking on the role of people manager, and you can still be a leader with a lowercase L. So for example, just think about a cross-functional meeting in which you're the only person in the room who maybe represents your craft or discipline. And in that instance, you have the opportunity to lead. And you do not need a whole team of direct reports to show up as a leader. So really in our industry, being a leading IC really means designing, impactful solutions, whatever it may be, that's part of your scope, largely by yourself or kind of with your peers, but not being accountable for direct reports and their individual, career growth tracks. I think the types of skills necessary to be a leader, comes back to some things we talked about earlier in the conversations, but leading with compassion, that's a great trait for any successful leader, because it's an active, skill. It's a decision to be able to nurture others on your team. And you do not have to be someone's boss in order to kind of influence and bring people along. I think recognizing that you have a role in shaping culture at your organization is huge. So really creating space at work for others to thrive. And that can be really everything, getting involved with onboarding, coming up with new team rituals, influencing the org design, and helping your manager maybe make certain decisions. And then really, I'll just end on this idea of spreading optimism. I feel like I'm conscious of my influence and want to use my time to spread positivity and hope. And I feel like right now there's so much going on in the world. It's important to remember that you just, most people have a platform, a voice, and can kind of influence things to move in the right direction. So while it may not always feel like this, people really do come together, and it's really important to keep that momentum. So there's so much you can do to lead. I think as long as you're self-aware and kind of conscious of how you can affect other people. But I love this idea just because I feel like most junior people who join a team assume that they have to stay heads down. And a term that a lot of my students use is this concept of pixel pusher, which I will say, I mean, maybe that happens, but I try and empower people no matter their title, level, experience, and encourage them to really look up and share ideas on how they can really build confidence and influence the bigger picture. And they tend to really grow fast if they kind of recognize that earlier on in their careers.
Yeah, absolutely. And, since we spoke about it, the IC, individual contributor concept just makes so much sense. Jess, is that something you can go with as well? I mean, do you you've been in leadership roles for a while now, but, is empowering the more junior members on your team to lead, is that a really important part of your job?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Rachel mentioned, just folks not knowing, like people who are individual contributors, not knowing they have that potential or runway to do so. And so what I like to do with my teams is, when we're building career ladders or career pathways, it's like, yes, the craft and the skill and the pixel pushing is super important for their roles, but also letting them know that influence is a really important part of their job too. And just giving them the permission and the space to show up in that way they know, versus, not having that to begin with. Because some folks, like we were talking about, are natural leaders. And if they're ICs and they are also natural leaders, they will lean into that naturally. But other individual contributors on a team might not be. And since it is, as we were saying, a learned skill, just making sure they know that they have the permission and the space to show up in that way can be huge for folks to be able to do so.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. And Matt, I know that you mentioned, you're an introvert, which I definitely recognize in myself as well. Was the ability or the the ability to showcase your kind of leadership credentials, was that kind of something that took a while for you, or did it come naturally?
Yeah, I think early on, I think I slowly realized that there is no, and I'll say this again, there's no cookie cutter of like a leader is this, right? A leader is great at presentations, a leader is great at this, a leader is great at that. That's completely untrue, right? And I spent a lot of time unpacking like the leader I want to be, but with my team I also spend a lot of time going, well, what kind of leader do you want to be, and how do you want to be seen as that? Because you're still an individual, you're still a person, right? We're talking about business, and it's almost like we're superheroes. Well, actually not superheroes, that's a bit much, but it's almost like we've got these completely different personas, but actually you're still an individual. I think it's important to shape yourself into a leader that you want to be. And I said earlier, like through my experience, I've certainly shaped my leadership style. It's, avoiding the micromanagement, avoiding, all those kind of things that I know stifles creativity or maybe stifles that other people's leadership, which you have to kind of understand and spend a bit of time kind of unpacking their how they personally like to work. Because I think we can force people into these scenarios of leadership in a traditional sense, which may be like you go and present in an all hands or an org structure or something like that, and that's not leadership really. That's just putting yourself in front of people, right? That's a confidence in a very different way. So I think it's about demonstrating that. I think Jess made a good point in previous question on org structure around the importance of squads or tribes or specialisms, right? As in how you form your teams. They are great examples to allow people to thrive and flourish in what is a natural leadership response, right? If you can set up little squads or pockets of kind of like cross-functional team members, it gives that person that ability to show their leadership within their craft, within their skill set, and also kind of coach sometimes a group through, difficult scenarios, whether it be succeeding or failing in a project. I think that's really important, that leadership comes with a lot of this on the fly kind of learning, if you will. I do think, and sometimes it can be a difficult one to manage, but setting your expectations on especially specifically like IC as well as on the managerial tracks around kind of what does it actually mean to be that individual, building competency frameworks, for example. So individuals know, like, what am I aiming for there? But also your own personal expectations. We have enough experience here, I'm sure, to know maybe what a senior designer should be responsible for versus not responsible for. I think sometimes just putting those out there so people are aware allows them to maybe unlock other aspects, because they might, dare I say, tick those things off and go, yeah, I'm all good, I'm done on that. So where else can I demonstrate how much better? And sometimes putting little case studies of other people in organizations can also give them that benefit. I used to do a lot of shadowing programs at Gusto where I knew I wanted to upskill team members. So I would say, hey, go shadow someone from a previous agency that I know. That will give you a little bit of a different point of view rather than, getting frustrated with where you are. The optimism is a very good point, Rachel, around you have to be optimistic as a leader. And we know in-house roles can be high pressure and high stress, but sometimes you need to make sure that people kind of take themselves out of that and realize, hey, let's just take a pause, zoom out, and let's think about where we want to go in our careers.
Yeah, 100%, and I think it's a really good point to end on that one. And also the fact that, like you said at the start, there's no one set way to lead. There's no one set career path that gets you to that leadership point, and there's no one set way to kind of be, I suppose, as a leader. I think that's a really good message to take away, and actually to end on, because we've come to the end of all the questions I had for you guys. So thank you so much, and really appreciate your time, really appreciate your answers, super insightful. We've got 7 or 8 minutes just for a couple of questions from the audience. So I think just because we haven't got quite so much time, I might just pick on one or two of you for a certain question, because then we can maybe get through a few. And then, it'll hopefully lead to us not overrunning too much. So I've got a question here that says, a lot of the importance of these relationships that come from creative leadership seem to be impacted by learning how to lead with story and narrative. But what are ways someone can begin implementing that in our own teams when it hasn't been done before? Jess, I'm going to put you on the spot with that one, if that's okay with you. Did that question make sense to you, first of all?
I think so. So in the absence of, having involved story or pitching with partners, how can someone start to bring that practice into their team? Is that right?
I think so, yeah. Also, where it's not inherent, that story and narrative are part of, the brand, the journey, things like that. What are ways that someone can begin implementing that in your own teams when that's not been done before?
Yeah, I think if the muscle or maybe the knowledge isn't there, I would say there's a ton of great resources online around brand building and storytelling, and even talking to people that are experts in this area. Shadowing is another great option to take up. And once you kind of built up some more knowledge and information, you can start taking that back to your team and building decks that help to tell those stories of your brand, depending on what you're trying to present or communicate. But I think it starts with like the knowledge skill building in that area, and then evangelizing that internally and working collaboratively with your team to help get the story and the presentation to a good spot.
Nice. Matt and Rachel, do you have a point of view on that one at all? If not, we can move on.
I mean, Jessica answered it in a great way. I would say don't be afraid to practice. So, you know, whether that's with a colleague, a friend, to yourself, record it, whatever it may be. If you are, you know, less inclined to be someone who can kind of just do it and get in the room and think on their feet, it's totally fine to also make room and space to practice and fail and learn and get feedback, and keep getting better. So I love what Jessica said and kind of her response, but I would remind you all, it's totally fine also if you need to practice and find different ways to build that expertise.
Cool. I've got one question here from our speaker yesterday, Aaron Poe. Hey, Aaron. How you doing, well, mate?
Oh, Aaron. Hey, Aaron.
He started off with a name that I'm never going to be able to pronounce. And Rachel, I know you're French, so I really apologize in advance for I'm going to pronounce this. But Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I'm not even going to try. Someone called Antoine. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Once said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood. Divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. So what advice do you have for creating a strategy and a vision for a B2B brand team? What a great question. Matt, I'll land that one with you.
Yeah, great question. I don't really like boats either, so that's an interesting analogy. I actually spend a lot of time with my teams crafting a vision and a mission, because I think it's important that they get behind it, right? It's hopefully they'll be here longer than I am, potentially, you know, in their careers. And I want them to be part of that. And it also helps kind of, dare I say, rally the troops, right? Get them involved in it. The last thing you want is a leader coming in and saying, this is what we're doing. This is our mission. This is our vision. You know, we're going here, we're going there, because it's going to ruffle some feathers. For me, it's all about that collaboration. It's all about crafting that story with the team, taking them once again on the storytelling journey, right? Why is it important for us to have a vision and a mission? Why do we want to get there? You know, and it goes down to that slight unpacking of the challenges you face as a team, avoiding the coloring in or the pixel pushing or whatever you want to call it, and going, okay, guys, it's like X amount of time. Let's not worry about how long it takes to get there. Where do we actually want to go, and where do you want to go in your careers? Because we can shape that as a team. It also enables a really interesting dynamic to then create team goals off the back of that mission and vision, right? So how can you create stuff that alludes to that? So I would say it's not about being a heavy-handed leader, and it's about making sure your team is on that journey and is as responsible for crafting that mission and vision as much as possible.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Are you sure Aaron didn't send you that question beforehand?
I wish so.
Just to quickly add to that, I couldn't agree more with the building the mission and vision with the team. Something I've done in the past too, in similar types of exercises, is craft team core behaviors or team principles. That way, when things get hard, or if they don't, or if we're celebrating, you can always point back to those principles as underlying behaviors and ways of showing up across the team. So that's worked really well too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's such a good question. I'm going to ask for your input, Rachel, if you've got one. Apart from that, I'm butchering the French language.
Expert. So, yeah, I mean, I think these great panelists kind of answered it really well. To Justice's point, I think, developing team agreements together, I think especially is important right now in distributed environments or distributed workforces, because everyone works differently, maybe shows up in new ways. You know, everyone has kind of evolved into new types of workers over the last few years. And so being open and transparent and kind of building new team rituals or agreements together is key. I think something that I was kind of going in my brain as everyone was answering this question, it also made me think back to, Dave, the question we didn't answer, the kind of part two of what you look for in a candidate. And I'll just say, because it speaks to this, that when I'm hiring people, I'm looking for, I ask myself, would I work for this person one day? Are they strong enough to kind of be on my bench? Because eventually my whole role, I have to render myself obsolete in a way, and kind of build a bench kind of together. So it really is less of a hierarchical idea of leadership. It's kind of leading from the side and kind of bringing people along on the journey. And it's much more, human-centered than maybe, a decade ago or whatever. I think people's needs have really changed in terms of what they're looking for in their people leaders.
Absolutely. And I love that we've ended there. Such a good point. Listen, that's all we've got time for today. So thank you so much to Rachel, to Matt, to Jessica. Your points were so insightful, and I really hope that's inspired everybody here to go away and be a more effective creative leader, whether that's with a uppercase L or a lowercase L. But thank you guys so much. For folks tuning in, we've got 4 more sessions today. So if you're tuning in, really hope you enjoy the rest of BYOB today.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.